Conceptualising what good international cyber governance should look like is a topic of ongoing debate. While several principles of governance and data security have been largely agreed upon, considerations such as the right to privacy, access by the state, and the use of private data need to be managed and balanced even. This next session will focus on the issues surrounding cyber strategy and digital governance. It will be led by Nile Liosk, Estonia's Ambassador-at-Large for Digital Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the panellists for this session are Dirk Hergar, Head of Operational Cybersecurity at Germany's Federal Office of Information Security, Simon Milner, Vice President of Public Policy APAC at Meta, Her Excellency Josephine Teo, Singapore's Minister for Communications and Information and Minister in charge of Smart Nation and Cybersecurity, Nguyen Tutrung, the Managing Director of DTT Technology, who is joining us live from Vietnam. Please join me in welcoming them all.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here and looking forward for an amazing panel that we are going to have, even though some of you may already be longing for lunch or a drink or something similar. And I'm really glad to have 4 panelists here. So welcome, Your Excellency Josephine. We will continue with Josephine as we just agreed. Simon, Dirk, and the biggest difficulty in preparing for the panel, Nguyen from Vietnam. Please correct me if I am entirely off with my pronunciation. But what we will do today, we will continue the discussions that we have had earlier this morning and also yesterday, really discussing what is the role of technologies in our world and how it actually interplays with geopolitics. But as the title of this session also says, we are a little bit entering now to a bit more playful playground and really see whether we see and how we see the emergence, let's say, of cyber and digital. So I would say that in the past years, or traditionally, we always considered cyber a really serious thing, dealing with all the risks, everything that can go wrong in the cyberspace, and digital, something that is a bit more playful. So everything good that the technology brings, modernization, innovation, efficiency, improving relationships between each other, with people, governments, private sector, and so forth. And this actually translated also, let's say, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I am from. So I'm a digital ambassador coming from trade, economic policy branch, also technological partnerships, and then we had cyber more inclined, let's say, to defense. But what I see now is happening, as has also happened in our ministry, is that actually these 2 areas are quite a bit interlinked. And there are actually very many reasons for this. One of them is the technological development itself, for example. It's obvious that it's not possible to protect ourselves when we are not technologically advanced. So let's say that technological advancement is actually at the core of our security. Disinformation, for example, that perhaps in this geopolitical discourse started more with the potential implications on our democracy. We had examples from election campaigns that were intruded by other nation states. But by now, what we see, what is happening in Ukraine in the light of the war that is accepted by many, due to the disinformation campaigns, we can see that it's actually a matter of national security. And the last aspect, what I would like to bring out here before we get to our panelists, is related to the nature of cyber attacks themselves. What we have seen increasingly in Estonia, and we have much better experts here commenting hopefully on this aspect, is that we don't see we don't see cyber attacks only on critical infrastructure or government databases or government services, which are actually not even that important for people. But we see attacks on people's everyday lives, the services they use in their everyday going, hospitals, kindergartens, schools, universities, which means that it is increasingly difficult to protect yourself when you do not have a strong digital society. Or, for example, in Estonia, it has been much easier for us to handle these massive cyber attacks because everybody uses a secure digital identity. Nobody uses an email and then maybe a password and a PIN code, so we don't have to put that much effort only in building the cyber capacity, but we have really embedded these security elements into our digital society. So I would say that it's increasingly more important also in the cyberspace to see how you digitalize your society. And we will focus on two, I would say, interlinked issues largely. One, of course, is related to technology governance. And the other is really how we actually, in our real life, manage to bring digital and cyber together and how we manage to balance risks and opportunities. Estonia is a great example, I believe, of a country that has really managed to leverage what technology can offer, to modernize its society, for economic growth. Definitely Estonia is much bigger than its 1.3 million people size due to technologies. But we see also increasingly risks. So I would like to perhaps kick off with the government representatives, but I'm glad that we have Meta also in the room, and perhaps get your views. In the past years, we have really started to tackle these, I would say, difficult developments around technology. In the previous session, we talked about disinformation, AI, data, and so forth. So Europe has taken a rather, I would say, regulatory approach, right? Even been referred to as the Silicon Valley of regulation. What are these implications of these regulations? Where do we see them working? Where do we not see them working? Or what is the approach to make sure that technology goes in the way we would like it to go? So I will perhaps start with my German friend, please.
Yeah, hello. It would be really nice to see it working. I'm in the security business now for more than 25 years. In Germany, we concentrated in the first 20 years on the governmental networks. And we have a lot of governance, how our agencies have to run their networks. And it's not so different from the private sector. They try to circumvent all those security measures we propose to them. And so it does not work simply putting out good guidance paper. You have to control it. That's governance. And due to the digitalization of our society, all the critical infrastructure use IT more and more. And in 2015, we drafted the first law in Germany where we enforced them to implement cybersecurity. And like with the government, if you don't control it, it does not work. And even if you control it, there was some question, what is the PKI, that it's working. And I assume that most of you know people who are senior experts with 10 years of experience in audit, and they are 25 years old. And this is what we get presented when we check what's going on in the audit. And I think the government itself must be able to, at least once in a while, check itself what's going on in the private sector. You have to pinpoint it. At least one test in a 1,000, you have to do it yourself. And if you find that it's not working, yeah, you need more regulations. Sorry, it's in the moment we are addressing who is controlling the private sector, how it's the expertise of them. We put in more regulations in it, how the audit is being done. It's the experience we have is that the private sector always looks for loopholes in the regulations, and then you have to react to it.
So you take the approach of first seeing everything potentially that can go wrong, and then try to regulate this all. So I'm wondering whether this will be challenged by our colleagues, because it may be actually that you do not know everything that is going to happen. We don't know. We had AI huge developments, very recently. Something else comes around the corner. We may actually not know what it is. So how actually to handle these situations that we may not be able to predict, not even in 6 months?
Well, if I may chime in right here, technology is going to happen, and develop at a very fast clip, and regulations are struggling to keep pace. But I'd like to come back to the point that you made, in your opening remarks, and to say that there is a need for us to strike a balance. On the one hand, we recognize the risks, but on the other hand, let's not forget the opportunities. So regulations have to be well calibrated in order not to impede opportunities, from being made available to our citizens, to our companies. And yet at the same time, if there aren't enough guardrails put in place, then obviously the risk of participating in the digital domain becomes so high that even if there are rewards, people may hold back. And that is the overall frame that we operate within. How to, at the same time as promoting opportunities, also put in place measures that give people the assurance of trust and safety. And here I think there is a lot of scope for deeper thinking. If we ask ourselves, how do you promote trust and safety? You can't run away from the fact that you must put in place good governance frameworks. But to put in place good governance frameworks first requires us to unpack what governance means. And if we were to break it down, there are essentially 3, or at least 3 components of good governance. It's the fact that the purpose is to prevent terrible things from happening. It is the fact that it tries to put limits on behaviors, on conduct. And the third important element of good governance is that it has to be reasonably enforceable. If it's not enforceable, then it's just expression of hope. So how do we bring good governance into play? There are things that we can do at the domestic level. And so, for example, in Singapore, whether it's dealing with misinformation, disinformation, we have some laws, regulations that we introduce. We know by all means that they are not going to be enough, but they are a start. In cybersecurity, of course, you also can put in place good governance. And these we apply domestically. But the very nature of risk in the digital domain is that they are most often global in nature. And actually, the actors in the digital domain, whether they are global companies like Meta or the malicious actors, they operate globally. And so governance is not going to be nearly as effective as it needs to be unless there is cooperation at the international level. And I think it is in the domain of international governance that there is still a lot of room for us to work together, still a lot of scope, still a lot of unsatisfactory elements. And we can speak more to what is needed there. But I think some attention being paid to good global governance in the areas that are of common interest, for example, in cyber, in regards to AI and how machine learning also is being deployed, in regards to data management. Those are areas where good international governance is really needed. And that is an area that still has a lot of scope for development.
Yeah, I entirely agree, because with the regulations we have also seen we have very different approaches, right, to this actually very global nature. In Europe we like to regulate. In some countries they don't regulate at all. In some countries they are still trying to be in the middle. So in order to have this, let's say, global good order, we need a good governance mechanisms. But before we go to some of the drawbacks over there, I would like to perhaps bring in the private sector view. You probably will say, okay, don't regulate, right? But
absolutely not. No, I wouldn't say that.
But I would like to say also, like, be responsible. So how do we make Meta and not only Meta responsible and keeping the, let's say, the business space comfortable for you?
Well, look, thank you very much, Neelie, and thank you to ASPI for this opportunity to speak at the Sydney Dialogue and to be on such a distinguished panel. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm responsible for Meta's public policy work across the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific, whichever you prefer, and that includes a really significant range of different types of governments, and unlike the EU, there is no place where kind of laws are set for all those countries together. Everybody does their own thing, and therefore that makes for some very interesting dialogue and real opportunities to try and work with other kind of like-minded private sector organizations and governments and academics and think tanks like ASPI to try and craft good digital governance around the world. And just to be absolutely clear, we're in favor of regulation. We think that actually companies like us should be held to account by democratically elected governments for the way in which we operate our services in their countries. We think that's absolutely reasonable and right. And indeed, for governments to provide the guardrails around our behavior to try and prevent harms and to do it in a way which is enforceable per your three kind of concepts around digital governance, absolutely correct. And when it comes to this question that I think is extremely challenging, and I do think that policymakers like Dirk and Josephine and Nini you have a hard job, because you're trying to balance so many different exigencies here around how do we frame policy in the right way to achieve the positive outcomes, the incredible positive outcomes that come from digital technologies, whilst also trying to mitigate the risks. It is very, very difficult. In the international sphere, I think the most successful examples have actually been in countering terrorism and countering violent extremism. So a couple of examples here, the Christchurch call led by the recently ex-PM of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, and President Macron in France, a fantastic example of bringing together companies, civil society, and governments to address the global problem of terrorists and trying to use networks like ours to try and radicalize people, indeed to organize terrorist events. And we've made tremendous strides through the Christchurch call and an organization called GIFCT to really actually collaborate in reducing the ability and disrupting the ability of organizations to do this. And we absolutely see, per what the Japanese minister was saying earlier, a tremendous opportunity to achieve similar strides when it comes to the free flow of data. Of all of the decisions that policymakers are facing or addressing right now, I would suggest that actually making the right call about privacy, whether you're in India, in Singapore, in Bangladesh, or in Australia, or in Japan, in a way that enables people to feel confident about using digital services, but also enabling the free flow of data that enables those services to work, is one of the biggest challenges of our time. And the decisions that policymakers are going to make, are either making now or will do over the next 2 to 3 years, are going to determine whether the splinter net that the Japanese minister talked about is going to, frankly, get worse, or whether we can actually address it. And that democratic and frankly other similarly minded, there may be a bit less democratic countries, but countries that want to get the benefits of this free flow of data can come together, or perhaps using the framework that the Japanese government is proposing to really build a new kind of agreement, a kind of system of agreements around the world of how data flows between nations.
Can I just add to, what Simon has just talked about? When he described a good example of international good governance being the Christchurch Call, it brought to mind another example that I think has the elements of what good international governance in the digital domain could look like. And it also relates to another point that you talked about, and I'll come to that a little bit more. I know your application is with regards to data. But before I go into that, there are certain things that are useful for us to keep in mind. In any industry that has got global impact, the governance frameworks around them did not get developed overnight. They took many years. So, for example, in industry like aviation, today you and I, don't worry too much about flying to each other's countries for conferences, but it wasn't always the case. Safety standards around global aviation involves many different parts, and they took a long time to get right. In the pharmaceutical industries, it's also the same process. What is really safe for people to take for treatment, medication. And in cyber, in digital, I think we will have to go through this journey. The example I had in mind, in addition to the Christchurch Call, is a counter-ransomware initiative that now involves 36 countries. There are some elements of this counter-ransomware initiative that demonstrate a few key pillars that contribute to effective international governance in the digital domain. The first is the importance of interoperability. I think this idea was talked about across different sessions. But how does interoperability demonstrate itself through the counter-ransomware initiative? What happens when a ransomware attack has happened is that there is a need to stop the payment to the ransomware actor. And in today's context, because the ransomware actors work across different jurisdictions, they are actually taking advantage of the failure of interoperability to get away. So the rules and regulations that would allow one jurisdiction to stop the payment to the ransomware actor doesn't work across another jurisdiction. And regulatory interoperability is very important. So the counter-ransomware initiative now says, well, should we find a way in which notifications can be implemented in each of the member states that are participating in this initiative so that we can all help each other to stop payment of ransom to these actors? That's one level. Another level in which this counter-ransomware initiative is demonstrating how we can all be more effective together is the idea of building resilience. Because as a ransomware is happening, you must have a way to stop it. You must have a way to disrupt it. But not all of us are equally adept at stopping it. So building capacity and each one of us learning how the other is disrupting ransomware is another very good perspective and a very good angle to international cooperation, international good governance. The third aspect is how we can build norms of good behavior. Because the actors in our own jurisdiction respond to our own laws, regulations, policies. We have to be willing to share notes with each other, what's working in our respective jurisdictions, and then not be shy about fostering higher norms as we go along. This is the kind of international cooperation that will lead to good governance around. And I should just say this. We talked about, whether the countries participating in this, they are democratically elected or what their values may well be. I think the beauty of the approach of the counter-ransomware initiative is that it tries to be a big tent, regardless of your ideology, regardless of your political beliefs. All of us want to get rid of ransomware. So is this a good foundation, a basis for us to work together? And can we try to make progress on it? Because we can't even stop at ransomware. There are going to be so many billions of IoT devices that are going to connect all of us. What are we going to do about ensuring that they are cyber safe? You'll need another governance framework. You'll need governance frameworks for AI and machine learning. You'll need governance framework for data management. And I think these are the practical ways in which we can move forward, and we should try and focus on them.
Great.
Thank you. But I think Nguyen is probably now realizing the disadvantage of being here, not physically but virtually. But I would like to turn to Vietnam to ask how have you, or how you would evaluate, let's say, the current existing possibilities, for example, for your country to be involved in shaping what is happening globally, but also guaranteeing that, that these technological skills that Vietnam needs also reach your country and the right partners to use it usefully and beneficially. So please.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're glad to be here virtually. So couldn't make the travel, but it's great to hear and be part of this. I think what the speaker just talked about is very interesting, and your question is about how, as a Vietnamese company, Vietnamese citizen, I wouldn't, I couldn't represent our country, but I can talk from the perspective of a Vietnamese company, a Vietnamese citizen. And yes, we are part of all these governance issues that you talk about. And being we call a consumer country more than a producer country in terms of technology nowadays, we need to balance, we need that balance more than I think ever, because for us, if we keep on using the technology without having a good framework on managing the risk, we just cannot foresee where all this thing going, where things are not in our hand in terms of technologies. But at the same time, we do need a free flow of data, and more importantly, the free flow of the technologies being deployed every day and being innovated every day now, because it's adding benefits to everyone's life. Talking about internet in Vietnam, like the remote areas got all this online learning, online medical healthcare during the COVID time. All of this have been only possible because of technologies, and our government, and I'm part of some of the task force there, I think has been learning a lot from the Estonian and the Singaporean government in terms of digital governance. We deploying the digital ID for everyone, and hope to have that as an important pillar in associate, making sure that we have that digital identity to do all the transaction, and also at the same time having the ability to govern. And we think end of the day, it's really about the user. Whether we use it, whether it's a system provided by Meta or it's a system provided by a company in Vietnam, or it's really in the hand of the user that the user will agree, or the user will see the risk of using that technology. Of course, Minister talked about the ransomware. That's the kind of risk, happen to any technologies, and I think that's the role of the government. But I think if we got the user to understand about these issues, and then the technology should give the user the power to decide whether they're gonna want more of this, or whether they will stop somewhere and realize that this is good, but a certain dosage of this is good. So in order to do that, I think what we learned from the technology application in Vietnam in the last 20 years that I involved with in government and in education is that being open, open technologies, open standard, interoperable is very, very important. Is probably the only way for us to be assured that if we going to have all this usage in this big platform or this big framework, we still know what's going on, and we still be able to innovate on top of everyone's contribution. So, and talking about AI, machine learning, metaverse technologies, IoT, all this, is more and more, machine-to-machine interaction. And if we don't know what is going on in terms of the technology being used, the standard being used, then it's really, I think we can just, beating around the bush and hope that we can put some framework in and govern this and govern that and hope that it solves the problem. But actually, I believe that with this pace of technology development, the only thing that can help you preventing the technology risk is technology. And the technology must be able to work and can only be able to work if it knows how the other technologies are working. So being interoperable is very essential, critical in the next stage, especially now we're facing how all this generative AI is going to work and how it's going to affect into all this internet usage we're doing. So in brief, I think Vietnamese company, Vietnamese citizen, in some degree, our government, I think we see the importance of the usage of technologies in everyday life. We love to encourage it, we love to use it more, but we also see the risk, and we like to be part of it by having an open technology, open standard framework where we can participate. And I think that is important, very important for us, from my point of view.
Yes, thank you. You pointed out so many things that I would perhaps like to follow up. And actually, the first one is the data sharing itself. We talk about so much about it, but is it really happening? Is now a question. And I'm wondering, whose task is it to make it happen? When we look at, for example, the European Union, by 2023, we should have 23 cross-border digital services. I am very skeptical. I don't think it will happen because we don't want to share data with each other, despite having the frameworks actually in place. Regulatory environment is rather similar, but we see very little of it. So how do we make it happen? Does anybody want to step in? Do you have a remedy for all our...
No, but international collaboration is really, really necessary. But Nguyen, I think your data sharing is a little bit different than what I have in mind. Josephine mentioned the counter-ransomware initiative, and I think data sharing between all our nation states would be really great to counter those bad guys. So for example, if here you in Australia monitor some command and control server from a ransomware group and see an IP address from Germany which is infected, I want to get this information as fast as possible. And that is for me the big outcome, or what I hope is coming out of this counter-ransomware initiative, that the problems with international data exchange between law enforcement and agency, this must be lowered. This must be much easier to send out this information all over the world so that we can warn the infected people. And that is, but this is not really about privacy. It's a lot of limitations law enforcement has. That German police exchanging information with Singapore, they have to go via the foreign ministry. And of course, it takes days or weeks to exchange this information, and I need it in minutes. Exactly. And of course, I totally agree that we need technical solutions to exchange this information as fast as possible. And I really expect an outcome of this counter-ransomware initiative is that it's being easier for us to exchange such information to protect people, because that's the reason why we want to exchange this information. Commercially used information, I think it's not up to me to comment on this. So
but interestingly, I believe it's Germany and Nigeria that are co-leading the work stream in the counter-ransomware initiative on capacity building that will enable some of these to take place more readily. But you know, if I may again refer back to Nele's comment, your question to us is that how do we, you know, put in place the right mechanisms for data free flow, if we could put it this way, and that we can exchange data in a secure, trusted manner. And I always like to think that the answer to how is why. It goes back to us trying to understand why is there a need and why is there an interest to share information, to share data. And you really can't run away from just the two fundamental needs. Data is a very valuable resource, and the collection, analysis, the harvesting of that data can be tremendously useful to organizations for growth, reaching new markets, understanding your customers. It can also be very useful in terms of you organizing your businesses and operations in a more efficient manner to cut down on waste and so on. So the incentive, you know, to try and get hold of the data and be able to make full use of it is there. The incentive is there. The incentive to share and is definitely not, you know, lacking. I think the issue really is that, you know, because it is such a valuable resource, then there is also the issue of theft of that resource. There is also the issue that maybe that resource could be misused. And that's why you want to put in place appropriate guardrails. And again, we must ask ourselves then, what do those guardrails look like? And I would suggest that there are also at least three elements to it. One is that you need clear accountability. Whichever organization is in the business of collecting, storing, and using that data, they need to know what their obligations are, and they need to be held to account. That's one very important feature, I think, of any good, you know, data governance framework. The second is that, you know, whatever rules that are put in place, you've got to make them accessible. You've got to recognize the fact that not every company is going to be as big and well-resourced as Meta. There are many companies out there that actually are still, you know, struggling to cope with regulatory requirements. And we have to find ways of helping them to access these kinds of rules in a way that is suitable to their context. So, and at the same time, another way of thinking about accessibility is that if there is this strong interest and desire to get hold of data, are there you know, ways in which you can build up secure ways of exchanging the data? We do some of this in Singapore. For example, in the logistics industry, we have a secure data exchange platform so that supply chain players, stakeholders can all be part of this network. We have the same setup for financial services, and in terms of making it possible for trading partners, people and businesses in the trading ecosystem to also securely exchange data, we built a platform called Trade Trust. So these are some of the ways in which we can try and bring accessibility to life. A third important component, I think, of data management is partnerships. We really have to recognize that, again, this requires good international cooperation, because it's easy in our respective jurisdiction to invent a set of rules around, proper use and accountability requirements around data. But imagine businesses in today's context having to, work across so many different jurisdictions. It's quite impossible, to meet all of our requirements and still get the business going in an efficient manner. So here again, I think is another call, for international partners to work together to facilitate data, management as well as data flows.
I love that, and maybe I could build on it in terms of partnership, because we certainly see that across many dimensions of our work as a company, is that partnership is absolutely essential. And an example of that, which will be of interest particularly to this security-focused audience, is how we go about disrupting information operations. So we publish now an annual report kind of detailing the work that we do in this area. So since 2017, we've disrupted some 200 different information operations networks, trying to use Meta's services to undermine democracy, to attack nation states, to attack communities, to attack human rights activists. That involves networks operating in 68 different countries and in 42 different languages. That work is absolutely aided by partnerships, including partnerships with governments, so governments tipping us off about things that we can then go in and look at, partnerships with other companies. Until recently, Twitter was a major partner of ours, unfortunately, because of part of the reduction in staff that we've seen in that company, that some of the people that we used to work with are no longer there, which is unfortunate. But these kind of partnerships are absolutely essential to addressing the kind of networks that are involved in ransomware, for instance, as well. So I completely agree with that, and we're very much on board as a company, and we're not unique. Many of the other large technology companies are also want to be part of these networks, because we all have an interest in trying to build trust to enable secure data flow in order for not just our services, but the kind of hundreds of thousands of smaller companies using our platforms to try and reach new markets and new customers to also be successful. So this is about large, small companies. It's also about companies that are still nascent, that can all benefit from the partnerships as we build the infrastructure to support future digital industries.
Thank you. When we started, 1 hour seemed like an incredibly long time for a panel, and soon we are almost finished. But before we take a few questions, I would like to actually still build on something that Nguyen mentioned, that people and everybody likes to use technology. And I am actually wondering whether that is necessarily true. When we see definitely what is happening in Europe, that people are getting more skeptical about digitalization because of everything that can go wrong. Your identity can be stolen, your data will be misused, your kids will be harassed, and so forth. So this has actually, I would say, also become a burden in a way, or an obstacle potentially for governments to introduce new digital innovations. And we are also contributing, we as diplomats are contributing to it, we as government officials are contributing to it. trying to build this awareness around all the risks. So we are saying, okay, be digital, the digital identity is a good thing for you, but if you go to digital, you will have all the bad things happening to you. So I am just wondering what we have to do as big players, such as companies, increasingly bigger players in this virtual space, but also governments. How do we get this innovation spirit up and not be, let's say, driven only by everything that can go wrong? So I would actually start with a bit conservative neighbor, traditionally, and I would then perhaps have the remarks definitely from everybody else, and then we have 2 questions, perhaps.
I think that it's the problem is trust. Do the society really trust what the government is saying, something is secure or not? We had this in the discussion before. It's about education and getting the message over. In Germany, we are dismantling right now our last 3 power plants, nuclear power plants. And this is something about trust. In the 50s and 60s, it was said nuclear power plants are secure. Then we had 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl, and then we had this incident in Japan. And still, I've studied physics, and in my opinion, nuclear power plants are safe enough. But safe enough, yeah. It's a risk you have to make. And if you look at carbon dioxide and nuclear, but that's my personal opinion, but the German society decides, okay, we don't trust in it. And if you look at it, if there are alternatives available, of course you can build this windmills and solar power, maybe even dishes in space. And the people don't trust in this technology. And okay, we have lost this discussion in Germany and we think about something else. But I think the problem was at the beginning, telling the people it is safe. Nothing is 100% safe. And to be honest, I think that's really important. And this is one case where it didn't work. So it's the beginning. The government must be trustworthy, not, I say, lying about the risk. Make it transparent where the risks are. And then I think we can convince our societies to accept digitalization.
Can I just say something about this? Yeah. I am European, but having now had the wonderful benefit of working in the Asia Pacific for a good number of years, I think we need to get Europeans to come and experience Asia more and realize that the world does not all think like Europe. And actually, certainly in our services are thriving around the world. We are continuing to see growth. And when I spend time across this region, including here in Australia, but also in Singapore, in South Asia, India, in Southeast Asia, and up in Korea and Japan and Hong Kong, Taiwan, we heard from the Deputy Minister earlier, tremendous enthusiasm for technology, for digital products, people seeing the benefits in their lives and wanting to see more of it. So I just don't actually see look, I'm not suggesting it's all wonderful. We absolutely have problems around scams, and we need to really try and work with governments to try and help people be more resilient, as well as try and address the scammers. But in general, we just don't have this level of negativity that you, I'm afraid, do hear quite often from Europeans when they are on panels like this. Hopefully Josephine agrees.
Absolutely. And I think in Singapore, we certainly believe that honesty is the best policy. We have to be very frank with our citizens, where the opportunities are and also where the risks are. And the more aware they are of the risks, the more they can protect themselves. But at the same time, it also is a responsibility of government to bring together the relevant parties to introduce the right measures that will improve the real level of safety. So some of the areas that Simon talked about, for example, scams. Individuals perhaps are, not so concerned about, systems being unavailable for long periods of time, unless it concerns their day-to-day lives. They're perhaps not so worried about confidentiality and integrity of systems unless, again, it cycles back to them. But on a day-to-day basis, if my digital transactions, make me vulnerable to losing lots of money, that's really not something I want to engage in. And it goes back to what we are prepared to do to introduce the right measures in order to govern the space. There is no running away from it. And in this domain, I think it's also not the case that all governments around the world are already very experienced in doing this, and you can just adopt playbooks. We're all learning, and the more we are able to learn from each other, I think the more likely it is that we will make progress together.
Yuan, do you want to comment your own comment?
I think I mentioned that people, decide what kind of dosage they're going to use technology in internet for. And I think European maybe, now have a different exposure, experience with this technology than the Vietnamese, the Asian. But I think what's important is that in this cyber physical world that's happening, you just don't have choice, right? You may now talk about, okay, I can stop participating in this social network, but you cannot stop your cars from using IoT system that's sending a lot of data over to the other machine. So that cyber physical is happening, and there's no run away from it. It's more important to have the user to be aware and just have that right. It's always a dilemma, but they have the right to use or don't use it, but have also the right to understand how the impacts of using it in that create the opportunities for them in the future, but also the risks that they're facing. And I think that's a big role of the government. The government is there to actually balance not just the technological part of the framework, data governance, and so on, but it's really to balance how the user, how the citizen can have the positive outcomes of technologies. And I think the partnership, the framework would be toward that kind of direction. And technology, once there's a problem, technology will come up with a solution to do that.
Thank you so much. I think the problem with trust is that it's actually an emotion, right? So it's not really based on facts. It's not enough for me to say that Nele is a great person, right? You have to know me a little bit to realize that I'm a great person.
You are.
Yeah, I think the same is with digital. It's not enough to say, oh, your data will be safely stored. People have to experience this. Yes. They must have actually this good experience with digital. And
trust has to be earned.
Yeah, exactly. Trust must be earned. So we have 1 minute.
Sorry.
And we have a question there.
She was first. She was
first.
waiting
You were
longer than
first.
Oh, I am very sorry. I thought you were an organizer. But please, you first and then you.
Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you especially for using concrete examples to illustrate what you were talking about. And Simon Milner, I was wondering if you could dive a bit deeper once more into the Christchurch call example, because I just briefly looked at it, and I think of a lot of the pledges that are being made are concerning topics that have been a problem in lots of cases with hate speech online, and how to identify who does it, how to take it off, etc. And maybe you could elaborate a bit more how that gives us ideas on how digital governance can work better in the future. Thank you.
Let's take also the other question and then
Yeah, sure.
you can.
Thanks. My name is Jordan Carter. I'm from the Australian Domain Administration, and I lead our internet governance practice, among other things. The Internet Governance Forum under the UN auspices is one of the locations where this sort of governance dialogue can happen. It's being held in our region in Japan in October, and Auto is actually hosting the regional version of the same in Brisbane at the end of August. But it wasn't mentioned in the whole panel, which I found curious. And so I just wondered, is that UN-IGF stream relevant to these challenges, or is it just not on the radar of the panelists? Thanks.
Are you happy for me to go
I love your
first?
questions, but I leave it to the panelists.
It probably would take too long for me to talk in depth about it. Happy to pick this up afterwards. Indeed, I have a couple of colleagues here who were there right at the start of the Christchurch call, and we can chat with you about it. I was just using it really as an example of how when the terrible events that happened in Christchurch, but one of the positive things that came from it, among a number of other things in terms of particularly community building in New Zealand, was the creation of this group and using the power that governments have to convene companies like us and many others to say we can do better in terms of addressing violent extremism. I think that kind of convening power of governments is essential in order to really try and build partnerships that increase trust on a range of digital risk areas. And then, sorry, I mean, look, there are lots of examples. Sorry for not mentioning the IGF. I think the IGF is a good forum. It's obviously not a forum that tends to produce frameworks that enable campaigns, and that's the difference, I would suggest. But absolutely, extremely important dialogue. Among many others. You know, the Summit for Democracy last week was also a very important forum. So there are lots of them. Sydney Dialogue is establishing itself as well as an important forum where we come together. But again, this is not rule-making, and it's not framework-making. It's dialogue, and I think we need a mix of both.
Yeah. I would just add to what Simon has said that I think at this stage of digital developments worldwide, the conversations will take place across different kinds of fora. There will be some fora that are primarily to serve the purpose of information and knowledge exchange. There will be some fora that will ask for voluntary membership, you know, and voluntary subscription to principles or, you know, governance frameworks. And there will be, you know, in time to come, fora that will, you know, require specific commitments, you know, that perhaps eventually will be reflected in the laws of our own lands. So it's still a shifting landscape. I think we will have to accept that at this stage of development, more dialogue is going to be necessary than less. Yeah, so I wouldn't be too concerned about whether one fora was mentioned or not. Yeah.
So, thank you. Oh.
I'm not sure. We're getting
Yeah,
dinged.
I don't think we have especially as we're already over time, and I would like to see whether Nguyen has final remarks. No.
No, I'm fine. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect. I think everybody's very grateful, wanting to go to have lunch. But I thank you, everybody. To conclude, I believe we are in a need for a dialogue, and I was trying to a bit interrupt, so we also hope to have Meta more present in IGF, for example. And
we're very present.
So until next time. So thank you.